Picture this. A man dies from an infected mosquito bite just weeks after opening an ancient tomb. His dog, thousands of miles away in England, drops dead at the exact same moment. The lights across the entire city go dark. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe something way more sinister was unleashed that day in 1922. They called it the Curse of the Pharaohs. And if you believe the newspapers from back then, it killed at least a dozen people who dared disturb the resting place of Egypt's boy king. But here's what nobody talks about. The actual evidence doesn't match up with the legend at all. So, what really happened? Was there an actual curse? Or did the media just create the greatest horror story of the 20th century? Let me take you back to November 4th, 1922. The Valley of the Kings in Egypt, hot, dusty, and filled with archaeologists who've been digging for years with nothing to show for it. Howard Carter had been searching for Tutankhamun's tomb for 6 straight years. His funding was about to run out. This was literally his last season. And then, one of his water boys stumbled on something. A stone step buried under the sand. Carter ordered his team to dig. They found more steps, then a doorway, and on that doorway they found seals. The seals of Tutankhamun. Carter couldn't believe it. He'd actually found it. But he didn't open it right away. Instead, he sent a telegram to his financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, who was back in England. The message was short. At last, have made wonderful discovery in valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations. Lord Carnarvon rushed to Egypt with his daughter, Lady Evelyn. On November 26th, with Carnarvon watching, Carter made a small hole in the door. He held up a candle and peered inside. Carnarvon couldn't stand the suspense. "Can you see anything?" he asked. Carter's response became one of the most famous lines in archaeology. "Yes, wonderful things." Inside that tomb was treasure beyond imagination. Golden statues, jewelry, furniture, chariots, and in the center of it all, a stone sarcophagus that held the mummified body of a king who'd been dead for over 3,000 years. The discovery made headlines around the world. People were obsessed. This wasn't just any tomb. Most royal tombs had been looted centuries ago. But this one, nearly untouched. But here's where things get weird. Just a few months after opening the tomb, Lord Carnarvon got bit by a mosquito on his cheek. He accidentally cut the bite open while shaving. It got infected. Back in 1923, before antibiotics, that kind of infection could turn deadly real fast. And it did. Carnarvon developed pneumonia. On April 5th, 1923, he died in a Cairo hotel room. He was only 57 years old. Now here's the part that really spooked people. At the exact moment Carnarvon died, all the lights in Cairo went out. A complete blackout. No explanation. And according to his son, back at their estate in England, Carnarvon's dog started howling and then dropped dead. At the same exact time. The newspapers went absolutely crazy. They started calling it the Curse of the Pharaohs. One reporter claimed there was an inscription at the tomb that read, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." Sounds terrifying, right? Only problem, that inscription never existed. The reporter made it up. But nobody cared about fact-checking back then. The story was too good. And then, more people connected to the tomb started dying. George J. Gould, an American millionaire who visited the tomb, died of pneumonia a few months later. A British industrialist named Joel Wolfe visited the tomb and died of fever shortly after. Carnarvon's half-brother died suddenly. A radiologist who x-rayed the mummy died. A scholar who was translating the hieroglyphics died. Even a worker who guarded the tomb died. By 1929, newspapers claimed that 22 people connected to the tomb had died under mysterious circumstances. 22. The curse seemed real. People started to wonder if maybe the ancient Egyptians actually had some kind of supernatural power. Maybe they'd placed a real curse on anyone who disturbed their dead. After all, the Egyptians believed strongly in the afterlife and protecting their tombs. Maybe they'd found a way to make it happen. But let's pump the brakes here and actually look at the facts. Because this is where the story gets interesting. Howard Carter, the guy who actually opened the tomb, the one who was inside more than anyone else, he lived for 17 more years. Died in 1939 at age 64, not exactly cursed, Lady Evelyn, who was one of the first people to enter the tomb, lived until 1980. She was 79 years old. Dr. Douglas Derry, who performed the autopsy on Tutankhamun's mummy, lived to be 87. Alfred Lucas, the chemist who spent years working on preserving the artifacts, made it to 78. Harry Burton, the photographer who documented everything in the tomb, lived to 60, which was actually pretty average for that time. In fact, of the 26 people who were actually present when the tomb was opened, only 6 died within the next decade. 6 out of 26. That's not a curse. That's just normal life expectancy for the 1920s. So why did this curse story blow up so much? Well, partly because people love a good mystery. But there's another reason nobody talks about. Howard Carter had made an exclusive deal with the Times of London. Only the Times could report on the tomb discovery. Every other newspaper in the world was locked out. They couldn't get access. They couldn't interview Carter. They couldn't even get good photos. The other newspapers were furious. So what did they do? They started making up stories. The curse was the perfect revenge. It made the tomb discovery sound dangerous and forbidden. It sold papers like crazy. And every time someone connected to the excavation died, even if they were old or sick or had been sick before, the newspapers would scream, "The curse strikes again!" Think about it. Lord Carnarvon was 57 and had been in poor health for years. He'd been in a serious car accident in 1901 that left him with chronic breathing problems. He probably shouldn't have been in Egypt at all, with all that dust and dry air. But the newspapers didn't mention that. They just said he died mysteriously after opening the tomb. George J. Gould? He was traveling through multiple countries during his trip. He could have picked up an illness anywhere. Joel Wolfe died in his 50s, which wasn't that unusual for the time. The radiologist who x-rayed the mummy was already in his 60s. People died younger back then. Way younger. The average life expectancy in 1920s Britain was around 55 years old. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Scientists have actually studied whether there could be any real danger in ancient tombs. And guess what? There actually might be. Not a supernatural curse, but something scientific. Some researchers think that ancient tombs could contain dangerous bacteria or fungi that have been sealed inside for thousands of years. In the 1980s, a German microbiologist named Gotthard Kramer found potentially dangerous mold spores in some Egyptian tombs. These spores can cause severe allergic reactions or respiratory problems if you breathe them in. Could that explain some of the deaths? Maybe. Lord Carnarvon did die of pneumonia, but here's the thing. If there were dangerous molds or bacteria in Tutankhamun's tomb, why didn't Howard Carter get sick? He spent years inside that tomb. Years. Breathing that air every single day. Some people have suggested that maybe the ancient Egyptians used poison to protect their tombs. But archaeologists have never found any evidence of that. No poison, no booby traps, nothing. The Egyptians relied on hiding their tombs and sealing them up tight. They figured if nobody could find the tomb, they didn't need curses. There's also a psychological aspect to all this. Once the curse story started spreading, people started looking for patterns everywhere. This is called confirmation bias. Every death got blamed on the curse, even if it made no sense. But when people connected to the tomb lived long, healthy lives, nobody talked about it. That didn't make for exciting news. Let's talk about that famous blackout in Cairo when Carnarvon died. Sounds spooky, right? Except Cairo had power outages all the time back then. The electrical grid was new and unreliable. It wasn't unusual at all. And the story about his dog dying at the same moment? That came from Carnarvon's son, who heard about it weeks later. How would he even know the exact timing? He was in Egypt. The dog was in England. There were no instant communications back then. The truth is, the curse story says more about the 1920s than it does about ancient Egypt. This was right after World War I. Millions had died. People were traumatized. They were looking for meaning in death. They were also fascinated by Egypt and the exotic East. This was the age of silent films and adventure stories. The mummy curse fit perfectly into that cultural moment. Plus, there was something else going on. Egypt was fighting for independence from Britain at this time. Egyptian nationalists weren't happy about British archaeologists digging up their ancestors and shipping artifacts to British museums. Some Egyptians actually promoted the curse story because it made British archaeologists look arrogant and disrespectful. It was a way of saying, "You shouldn't have disturbed our dead." Howard Carter himself called the curse story ridiculous. He said it was just sensational nonsense made up by the press. But he couldn't stop it. The story had taken on a life of its own. Books were written about it. Movies were made. The 1932 film The Mummy with Boris Karloff was directly inspired by the Tutankhamun curse story. That movie created the entire concept of the walking mummy seeking revenge that we still see today. And here's something wild. The curse story actually hurt serious Egyptology. Many people became afraid to work on Egyptian excavations. Funding became harder to get. Some museums were scared to display Egyptian artifacts. The superstition had real consequences for scientific research. But let's look at one more piece of evidence that proves the curse was fake. Remember those 22 deaths the newspapers claimed? Researchers have gone back and checked every single one. Turns out, most of those people had only the loosest connection to the tomb. Some had just visited Egypt around that time. Some had written about the tomb but never been there. Some had met Howard Carter at a party once. The newspapers were just making connections where none existed. There was even a study done in 2002 by Mark Nelson, an Australian scientist. He looked at the survival rates of people exposed to the tomb versus people who weren't. His conclusion? There was no statistical difference. Being exposed to Tutankhamun's tomb didn't make you any more likely to die young. In fact, the people who were actually inside the tomb lived slightly longer on average than the control group. So if the curse wasn't real, why do people still believe in it today? Well, the story is just too good. It has everything. Ancient mystery, sudden deaths, strange coincidences. It feeds into our fear of disturbing the dead and our fascination with ancient civilizations. Plus, it makes us feel like maybe there's more to the world than just what science can explain. Maybe there really is some kind of cosmic justice. But here's what really bothers me about the curse story. It overshadows the actual incredible discovery. Tutankhamun's tomb taught us so much about ancient Egypt. The craftsmanship of the artifacts, the burial practices, the daily life of the royal court. The tomb contained over 5,000 objects. Each one tells us something about life 3,300 years ago. And Tutankhamun himself was fascinating. He became pharaoh when he was only 8 or 9 years old. He died around age 18 or 19. For years, people thought he was murdered, but modern CT scans suggest he probably died from complications from a broken leg, possibly combined with malaria. He was a sickly kid who had the weight of an empire on his shoulders. The real curse of Tutankhamun's tomb isn't supernatural. It's that we got so distracted by made-up ghost stories that we almost forgot about the real history. Ancient Egypt doesn't need fake curses to be interesting. The truth is way more fascinating than any curse could ever be. Think about what Howard Carter achieved. He spent 6 years searching in brutal heat, dealing with limited funding, political problems, and skeptics who thought he was wasting his time. And then he found something that changed archaeology forever. That's the real story. That's what we should remember. The newspapers of the 1920s created the curse to sell papers and get revenge on the Times for having exclusive access. They preyed on people's fears and superstitions. They turned a scientific discovery into a horror story. And honestly, it worked. We're still talking about it over 100 years later. But now you know the truth. There was no curse, no mysterious deaths, no supernatural revenge from beyond the grave. Just normal people living normal lifespans in an era before modern medicine. Just newspapers desperate for sensational stories. Just humans seeing patterns where none existed. Lord Carnarvon didn't die from a curse. He died from an infected mosquito bite in an era before antibiotics. The lights in Cairo didn't go out because of ancient magic. They went out because Cairo's power grid was unreliable. His dog didn't die at the same moment through some mystical connection. That was just a family story that grew in the telling. Every single death attributed to the curse has a normal, natural explanation. Old age, disease, accidents. The same things that kill people today. The only difference is that back then, reporters could blame it on an ancient curse, and people would believe them. So, the next time you hear about the curse of Tutankhamun's tomb, remember what really happened. Remember that Howard Carter lived for 17 years after opening that tomb. Remember that most of the people who were actually there lived long, full lives. Remember that the curse inscription the newspapers quoted never actually existed. The real legacy of Tutankhamun isn't a curse. It's the window his tomb gave us into ancient Egypt. It's the golden mask that's become one of the most recognizable artifacts in the world. It's the proof that ancient Egyptians were master craftsmen who created beauty that still takes our breath away thousands of years later. And maybe that's the real magic. Not some supernatural curse, but the fact that human hands created objects so beautiful and meaningful that we still care about them 3,300 years later. That's way more impressive than any made-up curse story. The boy King Tutankhamun was almost forgotten by history. His tomb was small compared to other pharaohs because he died so young. He wasn't a particularly important ruler during his lifetime. But because his tomb survived intact, he became the most famous pharaoh of all time. Not because of a curse, but because of what his tomb taught us. If you found this interesting, subscribe for more deep dives into history's biggest mysteries.